Hey, so today I was actually really fucking tired and I didn't want to make this video, but I told you that I would. And trying not to be such a slack ass bitch no more, if you know what I mean. Uh, okay, well today I got a few questions the other day about like what my opinions are on abstinence only treatment versus a harm reduction approach to addiction, I guess. And before I get into this, I should note that when I started in this field like 5 years ago, it was in a harm reduction capacity. I was working at a methadone clinic, so it was never really about, you know, making sure that people weren't using at all. It was more just about making their lives safer and more functional. And I kind of have continued down that path since, so I am pretty biased towards harm reduction. So the thing about abstinence-only treatment is it's very popular. Like basically, it's really the only type of treatment that most people can access. Kind of all happened within the past 60 years or so. All these treatment centers started popping up based on kind of a 12-step idea of just like admitting you're powerless over your substance use and then not doing it anymore and making sure you were sober, like completely sober, like abstinent from every single thing, no matter what what the object of your addiction was. And this isn't to say that I don't think that abstinence is a good goal. In fact, I think that for a lot of people with addictions issues, abstinence is the safest and most helpful thing they can do. It's really beneficial. A lot of people use in a way that is really dangerous, either to themselves or just to their lives or to the lives of other people. So I do think that abstinence is a good goal to have, but I do not think that abstinence only treatment is necessarily the best path to recovery. One of the things that I have a problem with when it comes to abstinence only treatment is that it really focuses its attention solely on the addiction rather than the person and where that person's come from, who that person is, what that person values. So when they're just like, you need to stop using everything, then instead of their focus being using, their focus becomes not using. And that's kind of what is controlling their behavior from that point on, which isn't necessarily super healthy either, right? Because, you know, you're so like, you're just so like focused on not using and staying sober that it's really just all consuming, right? Like you don't have time to think about anything else. And I don't think that it really helps you move forward in the most efficient way, I guess you could say. I think that when it comes to setting goals, you know, you should be setting positive goals. So instead of negative goals. So I guess my idea of a negative goal would be my goal is to not use anymore. Whereas if you flip that into a positive goal, it'd be like, my goal is to, you know, insert other healthy and beneficial activities into my life to improve my own personal well-being, right? So that can include not doing drugs or not drinking or not gambling or whatever, but that doesn't make it the primary focus, right? So you're kind of focusing on implementing new and positive things into your life rather than completely focusing on how you need to stay away from drugs and alcohol. I think it makes it, I guess, just more, it just makes sense more when you think about what addiction really is. And typically it's just, addiction comes from feeling like you don't have control over your own life, or you don't feel like your circumstances are necessarily healthy for you, right? So if you're in a bad situation, you're not feeling good about your life, you don't feel like you have a purpose, maybe you feel like you just can't get ahead, right? So maybe you're stuck in a shitty situation that's really hard to get out of. You know, those circumstances are what breeds addiction, at least in my mind. So when we think about what treatment should look like, my first thought isn't you need to stop using. My first thought is, why are you using? How can we improve your life in a way that kind of minimizes the need for you to use these things? And I think that that's missing from a lot of treatment programs in this country and all over the world, really. Another thing about abstinence that I don't really agree with is a lot of it's kind of like purity based. So a lot of times you'll hear like people are getting clean, and which, you know, implies that they were dirty before when they were using, which just isn't great. You know, again, that's kind of along with what I was saying last time, that just kind of implies that there's something wrong with that person, right? Like they're dirty, they need to change so that they can be clean. And if they use again, guess what? They're dirty again. So that really it can breed some shame and some guilt there as well. The other thing with abstinence, I don't know, there's a lot of things that I don't super agree with when it comes to abstinence-only treatment. I don't like the idea of the one day at a time, the one day at a time, like, mentality of a lot of abstinence-based treatment, as well as 12-step groups, right? There's like one day at a time, you know, if you use, basically that's a relapse. That's how they view that. So if you drink one beer, it's just the same as if you were to drink 100 beers, which first, like, kind of puts people in danger, because if you're really into this abstinence only structure of treatment, and maybe one day you have a shitty day and you drink a beer, and then you're like, well, shit, I'm dirty now, I might as well just drink 20 beer, and then, you know, who knows what's going to happen after that. It's not great. It makes it seem like if you are to slip, if you are to use, or you are to drink, or you are to do anything, you have to start over again. And that can seem very overwhelming and kind of hopeless to people who are trying to recover from addictions. I mean, one of the, I guess, an inherent quality of addiction recovery for most people is that they're going to use at some point, right? There's going to be a lapse. Maybe there'll be a relapse. Maybe there'll be several, you know. So when they have this happen, they're just like, fuck, I got to start all over again. As opposed to being like, well, this is actually just like one moment out of my entire life. And one of my, well, not my favorite, but a writer that I do enjoy reading his books, his name is Stanton Peele, and he is like an anti-12-step guy, basically. He does not like any of that, like, hyper focus on abstinence. He finds it very harmful. But one of the things he says in his book, Recover, which is a great self-help book for addiction, by the way, if you're struggling or you know someone who is, one of the things he says is that when you think about like the abstinence-only framework of, you know, one day at a time, if you use, that's, you know, that's shitty, that's a relapse kind of thing, is to look at it this way. So your entire life is, say your entire life is an ocean. So it's an ocean. So what if you poured a bottle of wine into that ocean? It would just kind of like, yeah, you'd be able to see it there for a second, then it would kind of diffuse out, and it's like, oh yeah, like this is still my life is still on track, you know, like this happened, but now it's kind of, we're moving on, and that's how life goes. But when you think about the one day at a time mentality, it's kind of like having a bucket of water for every single day of your life. And if you pour a bottle of wine into that bucket, it does not diffuse out. It's just there, you know, kind of staring at you, reminding you of your mistakes, which I don't know. I mean, for some people that works and that's fine. But for a lot of people, that can induce a lot of shame and a lot of just feelings that you're not good enough and you don't deserve recovery and you'll never be able to do it, because you slip and you can see all these mistakes that you've been making. Instead of kind of looking at them as being like, you know, that's just like 1 second out of my entire life. I can deal with this. What have I learned from this? So that's another thing. Another thing that Stanton Peele says is that abstinence should fit in with an individual's life. You know, like it should just be a part of the life that person wants for themselves, rather than them having to build their life around abstinence, which again just puts their addiction at the forefront and kind of reinforces that idea that they are their addiction, that they don't really have like free will. And if, well, they do have free will, but it sucks. And if they were to follow their own free will, they would fuck up and relapse, basically. So like if you know, if you're an addict when you're 20 and you stop, you'll always be an addict. And if you use anything at all after that, you've failed, basically, and you need to start over again. And that's another thing I have an issue with. So when it comes to addictions and the abstinence view of addictions, it's kind of like, if you're like that once an addict, always an addict thing is really problematic for me personally, because it doesn't take into account just like normal human growth. It also doesn't take into account the fact that like 80% of people with addictions, or I guess like 3/4 maybe, let's see, 60 to 80% of people who have an addiction in their life just naturally kind of grow out of that addiction without needing treatment for that. And a lot of people who drank in a really problematic way when they're younger or used a lot, they find later that they're able to come back to use in a moderate or recreational way without returning to their addiction. And I think there are a few reasons for that, but I think the primary reason for that for me is like, when someone is addicted to something, when that first happens, it's because that is making their life easier somehow. You know, like that is, it makes sense in their circumstances to use in that way, because they are trying to, you know, escape or trying to feel some sense of purpose or meaning in their life, or taking some control of what they're doing when they feel like they don't have that in other spheres of their life. So, I mean, say this person is being abused and they're living in a really toxic environment. They don't have a job. They're super poor. They have, you know, their physical health isn't great. So they start to use and they're like, this feels really good. It's an escape for me. I'm going to keep doing this because it feels good for me. It's doing something that is relevant for me, and that's great. So that person decides to quit using and they go to AA, say, and the AA people are like, well, you can never ever use anything again, because since you're an addict now, that's just who you are and you will continue to be an addict, and you can't ever use anything again. But let's say that this person then gets some good support. So he ends up moving out of this toxic environment into his own place, or maybe like a place with roommates that are positive and healthy. Maybe he gets a job. He gets his health managed because he finally gets in with a family doctor. He feels accepted at work. You know, he's making friends. He's feeling really positive. He feels like he has control over his life and he feels really good about himself. This guy, even though he used to be an addict, if this guy's life has improved in all of these spheres, and we look at the 4 pillars of health, so that's home, health, purpose, and community. So when this guy started out, he didn't have any of that stuff. You know, like he didn't have a home where he felt safe. He didn't have great physical health. He didn't have a job or anyone around him that was a positive and supportive. And so, of course, this guy's going to be more vulnerable to addiction, and he was using in an addicted manner. So say that we worked to fulfill all those 4 pillars, like, right, he got his house, he's feeling better physically, he has a job, he has a community that he's in, he's feeling really good. If this guy decides sometime in the future that he wants to have a drink with a friend, and even if he used to drink like 80 beers a day, if all of these pillars are fulfilled and this guy is feeling good about his life and he feels like he has an identity, that guy is not likely to relapse into full-blown addiction. You know, of course there's still a risk. There's always a risk, but it's just not as likely. And when you think of abstinence-only treatment, they don't really take that into consideration. You know, they don't really consider the actual person behind the addiction, and all the variables that go into that person's health and well-being. It's like, all you have to focus on is abstinence, and it doesn't matter if you have a house, it doesn't matter if you're feeling, you know, sick today, you just can't use, right? It's not like, oh, well, I understand why you're using, let's see if we can boost your life in these areas, these 4 pillars, to make things easier for you and make this addiction less congruent with your situation. And that's where I think that harm reduction comes in, and harm reduction is, honestly, I really like it, because it's not putting the addiction at the forefront. You know, it's considering the person as a whole. It's like, who is this person? What do they need? Where are they? You know, like, are they ready to quit? Do they want to quit? Do they have housing? Are they using in a safe manner? Do they have access to medications? You know, so you see these people who seem to have just like really strong addictions, dangerous ones. And you're like, instead of being like, this person needs to quit, you say, how can I make this person's life more bearable? Because the more bearable a person's life becomes, the less likely they are to use in a problematic manner. You know, like, if your life suddenly is amazing, you're probably not going to stick a needle in your arm several times a day, right? Or at least you're not going to want to do that anymore. So harm reduction is really great for just making people feel like they're human beings, and letting them know, like, hey, I see that you're struggling. I want to help you live a more manageable, more comfortable life, and let's see how we can fulfill that by focusing on these 4 pillars for you. So home, let's find you somewhere to live. Let's get you checked out by a doctor, the health pillar, right? You need a purpose in a community, like, why not find you a volunteer position for now, or maybe a job, or, you know, maybe you want to go to school. You can find a community anywhere, really. Go to church. You can do that through volunteering. You can do that through 12-step groups if you want to. Just getting this person connected in all of these areas is really going to help them feel more empowered, right? So, I mean, when you have nothing going for you and you don't feel like you have a purpose in the world, you're not going to feel empowered to make any positive changes. You're just be like, this is my life. It's fucking shitty. I'm going to keep living this way because I don't think that I can, or like, I don't think I can or deserve to change, which is not true at all. But these people are so down and out, and they've been shamed for so long by the society that's just like, they need to stop using. And if they can't, it's because they're a failure, and it's because they're broken. And if they do quit and they use again later, they're just still an addict, right? It's like, okay, so what are these people supposed to do? You know, really, they don't have control over their own lives in that situation either, because they're consumed by this fear that they're going to use and that they're going to have to start their recovery process all over again. And it's scary for people, right? So I'm just going to touch on 12-step groups quickly. There's so much stuff that I could say on this one. It's going to be a little bit longer than the last video, only by a few minutes, but 12-step groups, I have mixed feelings about them. I mean, like I said, I don't like the once an addict, always an addict thing. I don't like the idea that you're powerless over your addiction. I don't like the fact that they really champion turning your will over to a higher power, right? Like, I think one of the main parts of recovery is feeling like you have the power to change your own circumstances, and that you can do that with the power that's inside of you, right? Like, you don't need these external forces to be like, you're a shitty addict. You need other, like, external forces to get you sober, and you can't maintain that without it. Like, AA is always like, at first, I think they want you to go to like a meeting every single day or something like that for quite a while in early recovery. It's just like, that's so I mean, the structure is good, and I like the community part. I like that people can meet other people in recovery. I think that is essential, because a lot of people with addictions, they only hang out with people who also have addictions, right? So like, a lot of my clients, they're just like, I don't have any friends who don't use. And in early recovery, that's very difficult to deal with. That's extremely triggering. So I do often tell my clients or encourage them to go to 12-step meetings, because that's really the only type of meeting in the city, unfortunately. And they'll be able to meet other sober people. But I just don't like the idea that, they're like, you need to come to meetings or you're not ever gonna recover correctly. Like, they don't take into account if somebody recovers in a different way. They kind of, it's a cop-out, because they're just like, well, they weren't really an addict if they could just quit another way, which makes no sense. Someone decides to like go to yoga and move to a farm and hang out with only a sober old man, and they get sober. The AA view of that is often that person must not have been an alcoholic in the first place, which is ridiculous. I mean, 12-step programs can be extremely beneficial for a lot of people. Treatment outcomes for AA, although hard to track because it's anonymous, not great. Treatment outcomes for any other addictions treatment, not great. Actually very bad. But I think that now that society seems to very slowly be moving in this harm reduction direction, I think that we'll see some improvements maybe in addiction recovery rates, or we're gonna change our view on what we see as being recovery, right, from addiction. So maybe that doesn't mean a person's not using anymore. Maybe that means that they're using in a safe and controlled manner, right? So instead of using in a way that is detrimental to their life, they're using in a way that doesn't interfere with their dreams and their other goals, which is not always possible. Like I said before, abstinence sometimes is really the only way to go for some people, but they have to figure that out for themselves, right? I have so many clients who come in and they're like, I should quit drinking altogether. And that's not coming from them. They don't want to do that. That's not where they are. They're feeling this shame and this pressure from external society and the people in their life and abstinence only culture to be like, if I'm still drinking at all, I'm shitty. If I'm binge drinking every second weekend but staying sober every other day, I'm still technically an alcoholic. And I'm just like, fuck. I don't know, man. Like, I drink on weekends. I do not consider myself to be an alcoholic in any form of the word, right? But again, if somebody views themselves as an addict, it's good to explore that and figure out why, like, what is underlying that? Why do you feel that way about yourself? How can we make the way that you're living more congruent with your values and what you want for yourself? And that doesn't always mean eliminating alcohol use. Sometimes that means just finding more exciting things to do during the day, right? What else about 12-step groups? I think by and large, 12-step groups are very inconsistent. Even just here in town, where I live, where there's like 10,000 people, I think there are 4 AA groups and 2 NA groups, and the groups vary widely in quality and content, right? So you might go to one meeting and be like, this is extremely religious and I hate it, and one other one where people are super cliquey, And another problem with some meetings is that people will show up for the sake of selling drugs outside of the meeting, or to find someone to have sex with, which is absolutely not part of the AA plan. So, and these are just anecdotal things I've heard from clients, right? They're just like, I don't like going to meetings because there's always perverts there, and there's people who sell drugs outside the meeting and all this shit. And I've also heard at some of the meetings here, like they're actually discouraged from talking about anything other than their addiction. So if they're talking about how they've been feeling super anxious, they're gonna, sometimes they get shushed or redirected, which it doesn't make any sense, because the focus is on eliminating the substance abuse and not the addiction itself, which is really important. And I think I should have mentioned this earlier, because if you're still watching this, I can't even believe it. But I think that's the last thing I'll say. And then if you have any questions, just fucking DM me or something, because I don't want to keep doing this. It's too long. But one of the big things that I don't really like about the abstinence only theory is that it focuses primarily on the substance of addiction. So, or substance of use even. So like, it's like you cannot use cocaine anymore. You cannot use these substances because you're addicted to them. But it doesn't focus on the addiction. It's not like, okay, so what's driving this? Why do they feel the need to engage in these things? And I think that the addiction itself is really the discomfort and the drive to find something that is an escape from the discomfort and the powerlessness and the hopelessness these people feel every day. That's the real addiction, right? So you see, like, if someone stops drinking and then they start fucking like exercising excessively, right? That's because, yeah, we've taken away this substance of use, but we have not treated the underlying addictive behaviors, right? Or the need to engage in these behaviors. So we need to focus on that instead of saying, like, this drug is responsible for your addiction, because it's not. It's absolutely not. That person's circumstances, that person's environment, that person's genetics, that person's biology, that person's psychology, that person's values, everything, all of that is underlying that addiction. It is not this fucking cocaine. Cocaine could be anything. And it will be anything if you don't treat this addiction, right? And I think one of the clearest ways to see this, and I think that Mark Lewis said this, and Mark Lewis is a neuroscientist who doesn't believe in the disease theory of addiction, but he believes that it's kind of more of a learning, just a way of it's a learning process, which is totally cool, and I'll talk about that in a later video maybe. But like, one way to think about it is, say someone smokes just cigarettes, and so we're like, oh, the nicotine in the cigarettes is what causes the addiction, so they need to quit smoking. So we're going to give them a nicotine patch because, that's safer than smoking, but it's still giving them the nicotine that they're addicted to, so they won't have to smoke anymore. But guess what? I think 16% of people actually quit smoking with nicotine replacement. And the rest of them use the nicotine replacement patches and gums and stuff, and they still smoke. So they're not addicted to, the nicotine is not causing the addiction, clearly, or that nicotine patch would be taking care of it, right? It's about the behaviors themselves. It's about the ritual. It's about how that thing is making them feel and what it's doing for them, right? So we have to figure out why it's doing that thing for them, what it's doing for them, how we can do that thing in a different way. I don't know. Anyway, bottom line, this is half an hour long. I'm so sorry. Bottom line, harm reduction, thumbs up. Abstinence only, I don't like it. I like abstinence. I do not like abstinence only treatment. Thank you for listening. I will see you later.